Hey guys, welcome back. It's been a while. Now, Peaky Blinders Season 6 has just been released on Netflix, so I thought this would be the perfect time to share with you guys my thoughts on this final season. I do want to preface this video by saying that although this is the last season of the show, they are making a movie which is set to start production in 2023, so we probably won't be seeing that until 2024 at the earliest. Which is why I put a quotation mark around finale in the title, because while this is the last season of the series, it's not the real finale just yet. And honestly, I feel like this is where a lot of the issues in Season 6 comes from. Please don't get me wrong, before you dislike the video and roast me in the comments, just hear me out. I still enjoy this season to some extent, and I'm still a big fan of the series, of course, and there were some great moments throughout Season 6, and I mean, Cillian Murphy is great as Thomas Shelby, as always, but I just feel like this was probably the weakest season of Peaky Blinders yet, and hopefully you'll understand where I'm coming from once you finish this video. I will be going quite in depth into characters and plot in this review, so bear in mind that there will be spoilers ahead. So I'll be talking through this season episode by episode and kind of summarize my thoughts overall at the end. Episode 1 gave us a strong start to the season. It picks up right after the cliffhanger we had at the end of Season 5. And of course we find out that Tommy didn't kill himself because Lizzie took out the bullets. We then find out that Tommy's plan at the end of Season 5 was sabotaged by the IRA. They want to keep Mosley alive because Mosley has a strong connection with the Americans at the time, and keeping him alive will increase the IRA's chance of acquiring more money and resources from the US. And as a result, many members of Peaky Blinders were killed, including Barney Thompson, the sniper, Abraham Gold, and most unfortunate of all, Polly Gray. I actually really liked how they handled the passing of Helen McCrory. Not only did they give a character a solemn and heartfelt send-off on screen, but the death of a character also plays a big role in this season. It essentially drove a bigger wedge into the relationship between Michael and Tommy, which was foreshadowed at the end of Season 5. Now, because Polly's death was a result of Tommy's plan being sabotaged, Michael blames Tommy as he believes that it was Tommy's ambition that killed Polly.
It was the ambitions and strategies of one man that caused this.
So we have this really well-motivated, hate-filled revenge plot that was set up at the beginning of Season 6, which is super exciting. On top of that, we also see in Episode 1 that because of Michael's relationship with Gina, he became well connected with Jack Nelson, or Uncle Jack, who's a pretty big deal in the Boston gangster world and is well connected to the US government. Interestingly, Jack Nelson is actually based off Joseph Kennedy Sr. Now, if you don't know who that is, it's President JFK's old man. And there are some pretty crazy parallels between the fictional character of Jack Nelson and the real-life counterpart. Look it up. This makes the season all the more interesting, right? Many villains going forward. We have Mosley, who's still unresolved from the previous season, IRA, who sabotaged Tommy's plan and wants to be in alliance with Mosley. We have Uncle Jack, who's an Irish Boston gangster, and we also have Michael, who's dead set on taking revenge on Tommy. So while Episode 1 starts off by picking up directly after the end of Season 5, it soon flashes forward 4 years, which I'm perfectly fine with, but it kind of led to the first issue. When we learned that it was the IRA who sabotaged Tommy's plan at the end of Season 5, there were threats made. It felt like they were a menace, and these 4 years Tommy should have been operating under their control, or at least with great limitations. However, it doesn't really seem like there was much consequences with the IRA 4 years later. Tommy seems to just be, well, doing business as usual. I do really like how Episode 1 highlighted the fact that although it has been 4 years, Michael is still no match for Tommy. Immediately after they meet to discuss the business Tommy wants to have with Uncle Jack, Michael gets completely outplayed and gets himself thrown in prison. And then we get possibly the best line that sums up Thomas Shelby for this entire season.
I have no limitations.
Overall, I thought Episode 1 was a pretty strong start to the season. It handled the death of Helen McCrory quite well, introduced new characters, set up relationships between characters, and gave the audience a pretty good idea of what to expect in the following episodes. And Episode 2 wasn't that bad, but it didn't really move the story forward as much. So it kind of continued with the build-up in Episode 1 and kind of clarified the relationship and strategies Tommy had planned. So we learned that even though Tommy wants to do business with Jack Nelson, who doesn't want to deal with the Peaky Blinders because they're a backstreet razor gang,
the Americans don't want to deal with an old-fashioned backstreet razor gang.
Tommy had in mind an alternative strategy. If Jack Nelson doesn't agree to work with him, he'll pull his connections with the LP Solomons and reinstate him as the leader of the Jewish gang in Boston, and essentially tip the scales in the Boston gangster world and potentially start a war. Actually, let me quickly correct. We actually learn about this strategy at the end of episode 1. It just shows like how much was set up in episode 1, but not much really happened later on. We also learned this episode that Uncle Jack, much like his real-life counterpart Joseph Kennedy Sr., believed that fascism was inevitable and wanted to suss out the strength of Oswald Mosley's political influence in England and potentially form an alliance with Mosley. Also bear in mind that this entire time, Tommy is still working for Churchill. He's still passing information about Mosley to Churchill, and he's still trying to undermine the fascist party from within. We also meet Laura McKee again in this episode. In case you forgot, she's the IRA lady that sabotaged Tommy's plan. Although in their interaction, I'm not sure if it's her acting or it's just a character, but it really felt like she has absolutely no power over Tommy anymore. I mean, yes, Tommy did surprise her with a letter from the US president or whatever, but surely Tommy is still under a lot of pressure from the IRA. But in this interaction and many interactions going forward, it feels as if the power dynamics have drastically shifted. Oh yeah, and by the way, if you're wondering, yeah, Michael is still in prison. Oh. Now, episode 3 is probably the slowest and the weakest episode of this entire season. As a big fan of Peaky Blinders, I've always kind of took pride on the pacing of the series. Given that each season only has 6 episodes and usually has a pretty complicated plot, the pacing is usually on point and gives no time for fillers. But for the first time, this episode felt like a filler. So at the end of episode 1, we find out that Tommy's daughter, Ruby, got sick. And Tommy freaked out, but then we learned that she's okay. And then in episode 2, we learned that Ruby's actually not okay and his sickness got worse, which puts a lot of mental stress on Tommy. And in episode 3, Ruby gets hospitalized and the entire episode is Tommy going on a big journey to find Esme to save Ruby because he believes that it's a curse, some sort of gypsy curse that's killing Ruby. I actually want to clarify that I don't mind this subplot, especially the result of it, because it just puts a lot more stress and pressure and guilt and emotional trauma on Tommy's mental state. My issue is that this subplot should have taken a backseat to a otherwise already jam-packed main plot, and should have been resolved in less than half an episode. Instead, this was dragged on for a whole episode, which as a result, the main plot pretty much came to a halt as we watched the subplot unfold, which ultimately had no direct impact on the main story. The only good thing we got out of this episode is that we got to see Ada, who has always been one of my favorite characters, just be a complete badass. The scenes she was in really show the audience that she is witty and can really stand on her own without her brother. And because she's always been pretty close to Tommy, it really gave me hope that maybe she will be able to take up the role of Polly in the family and play a bigger part in Tommy's strategies going forward. But yeah, overall, I didn't really like episode 3. I felt like it really slowed down the momentum of the story. Oh, and by the way, Michael? Yeah, he's still in prison. And unfortunately, episode 4 continues with the slow pace of episode 3, and once again focusing too much on the subplot and takes very little time to develop the main story. In episode 4, Tommy takes revenge and kills a bunch of gypsies because he thought that Ruby's death was to do with their curse. We also learn that Tommy has a son from some random relationship he had many years ago before he went to France. The only thing that really moved forward for the main plot is that Mosley, his fiancée, the IRA lady, and Uncle Jack finally sat down around a table with Tommy to discuss business and how they can help each other out, fascism, blah blah blah, all that stuff. Oh, and one more thing. Tommy catches Gina screwing with Mosley and blackmails her to spy on Mosley when they go to Berlin. That's pretty much about it in terms of the main story. And at the end of the episode, we find out that Tommy has this disease, which he caught from Ruby, which is causing his hallucinations, and because there's no cure for this disease, he will eventually die. This bit was actually a pretty big deal, and I thought it was pretty interesting because it will directly impact how Tommy will act in the following episodes now that he knows he's going to die. But overall, in terms of the main story in this episode, once again, it just didn't really move forward. Oh yeah, and also Michael, yeah, he's still in prison. Also, if you're wondering why I haven't mentioned Arthur this whole time, it's because he pretty much doesn't exist in this entire season. He plays a very little role so far and pretty much does not impact the main story. So we meet him at the beginning of season 6, addicted to opium, and that's pretty much it. So every episode he's either a junkie or he's trying to sort out his addiction, But once again, just another side plot that doesn't really impact the main plot at all. And this continues into episode 5, which is when he fully recovers from his addiction as Tommy brings back Linda to help him. There was also this scene down in the docks with Mr. Stagg, who I thought was going to play a much bigger role in the season, but ends up being a side character that has little to do with the main storyline. But hopefully he'll play a bigger role in the upcoming movie, maybe? And another one of my biggest issues with this season is that it took them 5 episodes to address the mole. So the mole who leaked the information about Tommy's plan at the end of season 5 was Billy. Obviously, we knew it was Billy, we just didn't know who he told the information to. I thought they were going to try really hard to find out who leaked the information because only very few of the family members knew about the plan. And I thought when they find Billy, they're going to punish him, they're going to deal with the mole in the family. But this didn't happen until episode 5. And even in episode 5, they didn't completely deal with him. They just kind of touched on him and revealed to the audience that he was the mole, which I'm pretty sure most of us already knew from watching the end of season 5 when he made that phone call. It wasn't until episode 6 when they really dealt with him. Oh, and if you're wondering where Michael is in season 5, yeah, he's still in prison. The final episode of season 6 was actually quite enjoyable. It tied up a few loose ends, Michael finally comes out of jail and confronts Tommy, and we also get this super epic gunfight in the fog with Arthur and the IRA lady. I gotta admit, there were some pretty good moments in episode 6. But that's also why I have such a big problem with this season. At the beginning of this season, in the first episode, it felt like the main story was going to be about Michael's revenge. However, as the episodes go by, he ends up just not doing much because he's in prison. So we think to ourselves that maybe this season is not about Michael's revenge just yet, and maybe Tommy is dealing with Mosley and Uncle Jack first. But no, we end up getting a big showdown between Michael and Tommy, which was really good actually, but there was just no build up. There was no strategies, no chess games between the two characters throughout the entire season. We spend more time with Mosley and Uncle Jack, and yet their story isn't resolved. On the other hand, the IRA lady is kind of the same deal here, but arguably worse. She was set up to be a pretty powerful antagonist at the beginning of the season, as we learned that she was the one that stopped Tommy from assassinating Mosley. But over the course of the season, she just felt so little, especially next to Mosley and Uncle Jack. And at the end of the season, she is the villain that gets defeated, but it just doesn't feel satisfying. And I think this ties nicely into my summary and my overall thoughts on this season as a whole. I feel like the biggest issue with this season comes down to pacing and the prioritization of plot and characters. And I feel like this could be the direct result of the fact that they're making a movie. Stephen Knight is a brilliant writer. He's been consistently banging on with every season of Peaky Blinders up until this point. But in this season, it's as if they're trying to save the good stuff for the movie. Look, I understand that in terms of the timeline of Peaky Blinders, it will ultimately lead to World War II. And with Mosley being a real historical figure and Uncle Jack being based off a real person, it does make sense for the big finale that resolves the conflict between those two to happen in the movie towards World War II. However, if that's the case, then this season should have been more focused on Michael and how he's going to take his revenge against Tommy. But instead, this revenge storyline was teased in episode 1 and then just resolved in episode 6. There was nothing in between. I think that with the many villains that were set up in episode 1, it's really important to have a main focus as to which villain this season is going to be about. But unfortunately, there was just no focus. It's as if the writer's decision on what the main plot should be is just constantly changing. And as a result of that, the pacing of the season just felt very slow. There are way too many side plots that doesn't have a direct impact on the main story, and they're taking up way too much screen time. And look, I understand that side plots can be very important when it comes to character development, even if they don't have a direct impact to the main storyline. But you have to have a priority. Especially with a story like this that's already jam-packed with so many potential villains and strategies and stories that can unfold, it really kills the story's momentum when we spend an entire episode focusing on one side plot. And I mean, there are only 6 episodes. We're trying to tell the story with so many characters in only 6 episodes. I don't think there's time. And all the characters other than Tommy felt pretty stagnant, if I'm being honest. Mosley was an absolute menace in season 5, but he did pretty much shithole in this season. Uncle Jack is supposed to be this powerful Irish gangster, but he also didn't do much. The IRA lady is also supposed to be pretty powerful, given that she ruined Tommy's plan, but it just feels like she's a tool in this season who's being used by Mosley and Uncle Jack. And Michael, who had this incredible revenge story set up for him, just ended up staying in prison throughout the entire season. Arthur was an addict for the majority of the season and basically didn't do anything until the final episode. And Gina... yeah, I don't even know what Gina did. And where the fuck are the Billy Boys?
Hello! Hello! We are the Billy Boys!
Who the fuck are you?
Did you not hear my song? These gentlemen are the Billy Boys.
They had a feud with the Peaky Blinders in season 5. Like, they were only on truce because Tommy decided to work with Mosley. So surely in this season, if they're working together, you should see Billy Boys either working with Tommy or have some sort of conflict between the two of them, right? But no, they just kind of disappeared. But the whole season, it just feels like there is a story there, but they're not telling it. It's like they're saving all the good stuff for the movie, which is what I mean by I feel like the movie is the reason why this season has so many problems. Okay, it's not all that bad, okay? I'm gonna round up this video by some of the good stuff that I really enjoy from this season. I like how they kind of followed up on season 5 in terms of Tommy's unstable mental state, and it felt like he's constantly fighting this internal battle while trying to deal with the outside world. I actually also really like Mosley's strategy of getting a doctor to falsely diagnose Tommy with a terminal illness, and here's why. It's a very Mosley strategy. He knows exactly what Tommy is like and what he will do if he knew that he was going to die. He knew the last thing Tommy wants is to be useless and lie in bed, sick, unable to do anything. So by telling Tommy that he will eventually become like that, and he'll have to rely on his family to look after him, he'll essentially become useless, it's very likely that Tommy will take his own life before he reaches that point. And at the very end, when Tommy finds out that the diagnosis was actually Mosley's strategy, it was almost like another metaphorical rebirth for Tommy, which I also really liked. Although I'm not sure why he spared the doctor at the end. I really feel like he should have just killed him. It would have been a lot more epic and would have been very Thomas Shelby, if you get what I mean. Or maybe he has a strategy to use this information against Mosley. I guess we'll have to wait 2 years and find out in the movie. Another thing I really liked is Michael's revenge plot and his final face down with Tommy. I just really hope that this season was much more focused on that. At the very end, when Tommy held Michael at gunpoint, he asked Michael to explain himself. And Michael said that no one close to Tommy makes their own decisions without his opinions, and how Tommy's lethal hand will always be on the shoulders of every member of the Shelby family.
No one close to you makes a choice without your opinion, Tom. Not Arthur, not me, not Ada. We can't escape you. Your lethal hand is always on our shoulders.
Man, that entire back and forth was so hard hitting. You could tell that both of them were hurting so badly from Polly's death. And the way Tommy said,
Speak to me, Michael.
you could tell that he was really hoping for Michael to give him an explanation so that he can let Michael go. After all, Michael is Polly's son, and like Tommy said, Polly is half of him.
Well, it was half of me. Still visits me in my dreams.
The way Tommy responded to what Michael said by saying,
Well, they made her own choices, Michael.
you can also tell that Tommy is feeling so guilty and responsible for Polly's death, but he just doesn't want to admit it because it would just be too hard for him to accept. I also really liked how Michael didn't beg, he didn't plead, he didn't try to talk himself out of it. He was just honest. He told Tommy how he really felt, and Tommy couldn't disagree. Oh man, it's such a shame how this season turned out. Like, I'm only disappointed because there was so much rich stuff in the material that could have turned into a great story for this season. And it could have been so much better. But anyways, that is my thoughts on season 6 of Peaky Blinders. If you stuck around, I sincerely thank you for listening to my rant. And as always, I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions of the season in the comments below. It's very refreshing to listen to different people's perspectives, and who knows, you might change my mind about the season. But yeah, thumbs up if you liked the video, subs if you haven't already, and go enjoy your movies.